The topic tonight is setting priorities, and there are a couple of preliminaries which are very, very important, and then I'll try to talk specifically about setting priorities. First of all, it's crucial to make a distinction between what I would call standards on the one hand and ideals on the other hand. A standard is a rule which you are pledged to live up to. If you fail a standard of yours, then you define yourself as a failure, as having committed a failure, as something that needs to be repaired. An ideal is something which, by my definition, you can't fulfill. You're not able to fulfill, at least not now. And you use it as an inspiration to grow in a particular direction. If you take a step in the direction of the ideal, then that's a success. But if you fail to fulfill the ideal, that's what ideals are for. If you have something which you are capable of completely fulfilling, I think that's a poor choice for an ideal. It's not fulfilling the role that an ideal is supposed to have. And a big difference between them is what you define as failure. For a standard, you have to live up to what the rule requires. Maybe if you don't make any progress over a certain period of time towards your ideals, then you consider your situation to be not a good situation. But not living up to it is something which is built into the definition. Now, when people hear this, there's an idea that bothers them. What do you mean it's something I can't do? The Creator made a set of laws called the Torah, and the Creator made them for, total, the Jewish people, and some for non-Jews as well, and He also creates us. So if He sets the law and He creates us, doesn't it follow that I am able to do what the law says? In which case, there shouldn't be any ideals the way I described them. Everything should be a standard. And any failure would be regarded as a failure and something which needs to be repaired. How is there room for something called ideals? So there's a tricky point here, in philosophy here. Let's suppose that a person does his best. And in doing his best, there are certain things he doesn't accomplish. Is he a failure? Well, yes and no. He didn't accomplish. He didn't fulfill the rule. On the other hand, if he did his best, what more did you want from him? Now, there are two attitudes here, close but different. One was taken by the great philosopher Immanuel Kant, who said, ought implies can. If you tell somebody that he ought to do something, it must be that he's able to do it. Somebody says to you, you ought to jump 20 feet straight up in the air. Your natural response is, what do you mean? I can't do that. What do you mean I ought to? It's ridiculous. To place an obligation on someone for something that he can't fulfill seems to be nonsensical. That's what Immanuel Kant held. But there's another attitude. Maybe the rule is something that applies to me. It's addressed to me. It creates an obligation. But when I do my best to fulfill it, I don't succeed. I'm not liable to any criticism or any punishment for not succeeding because I did the best that I could. If you ask me, what are my obligations? My obligations are to live up to the law. If you ask me, what reaction do I deserve for failing to live up to the law? Well, if I did my best, then no reaction is appropriate. No penalty is appropriate. So what difference does it make whether I say, when I can't do it, it's not a law and it's not an obligation, versus saying, when I can't do it, there is a law, there is an obligation, but I don't get any penalty for not living up to it because I did my best. What difference does it make whether you say one way or the other? Well, it does make a difference. I'll give you an example. I needed to borrow money. I went to the bank. I own a house, and I have a job, and I have an income, and I have savings. And the bank looks at my financial situation and says, okay, you want to borrow 100,000 shekels? Here's 100,000 shekels. And then, I won't say it about myself, but the person's house burns down and he loses his job, and then someone in his household gets sick and there are special medical expenses. And when the term of the loan is up, the bank says 100,000 shekels. He doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. He can't pay it. Now, if you follow Kant, well, since he's not able to pay it, he's not obligated to pay it. If he's not obligated to pay it, if you ask, are we living in a good world? Are we living in a world that has any deficiencies? The answer is no. Nothing's wrong. He's doing everything he's obligated to do because he's doing everything that he can do. There's no deficiency here. In particular, should I lend him the money to pay the bank? Why should I do that? He has no obligation to pay the bank. Why would I give somebody money to give to someone he's not obligated to give it to? But if you say it the second way, he owes the money to the bank. And he's failing to pay up the money that he owes. It's just that we're not going to put him in jail. We're not going to criticize him. Things beyond his control made it impossible for him to do. Then it would make sense for me to lend him money, because if I lend him money, I'm enabling him to do what he's obligated to do. I make the world a better place because you don't have an unfulfilled obligation anymore. Now, the Torah makes us responsible for other people's mitzvos. It's not just my mitzvos. Let's say it's Sukkot, and I have a lulav and esrog, and Reuven doesn't. Reuven tried, and he saved his money, and there was a disaster, whatever it is. He hasn't got the money to buy lulav and esrog. According to Kant, he has no obligation to do the mitzvah, because he can't. He has no ability to do it. Should I lend him mine? Why should I do that? He has no obligation to do the mitzvah. He's like a non-Jew. But if, according to the second idea, he does have an obligation, it's just that he doesn't get penalized for failure because he did everything that he could, then of course I should lend him my lulav and esrog. In that way, he'll do the mitzvah that he's obligated to do. So the second point of view is really the Jewish point of view against Kant. And by the way, not only the Jewish point of view, there are other philosophers that disagree with Kant in precisely this way. So then it comes out that, in a certain sense, the whole system of mitzvos is a system of ideals. The entire system of mitzvos is a system of laws, and I'm obligated to fulfill all of them. It's just that it's taken into account that I may not be able to fulfill all of them. And when I do the best that I can, there's no penalty for the ones that I failed to do. And then the motivation of the set of mitzvos is the motivation of a set of ideals, not a set of standards, because I've done everything that I can. This means that when you learn, and this especially is true in places like Ohr Somayach, where people come in with very little information, very little background, and they start learning something about Jewish laws and Jewish life, and even if they're doing the minimum of 7 hours of study a day, they're learning a lot of material. And many, at a certain point, become overwhelmed and say, I just can't do all of that. I'm not able to do all of that. And I think the correct attitude is, correct, you're not able to do all of that. And that being the case, you're not in any way liable to critique for not doing all of it. You accept all of it as an obligation, and therefore you accept it as something which you're going to make your effort to constantly increase your compliance with it, and to try to be able to come to the point where you can fulfill all of it. But if at the present time you don't have the ability to do it, you don't regard yourself as a failure. So Then, for about tshuva, and not only for about tshuva, but people who were raised in religious homes have various areas that they're not fulfilling. And when you realize that you have just so much strength, just so much resources, so let's say you have 16 areas that really need to be improved, and you don't have the ability to improve all 16, and that could certainly be true for someone who was raised in a religious home, then the question is how do you set priorities? What should I invest my efforts in? At the present, and of course that will change over time. It's not as if you make one decision and that's the decision for the rest of your life. Your circumstances change, and your environment changes, and your responsibilities change. You get married, you have children, and these priorities change. Now, I just want to indicate to you that, because if you tell these ideas to people, there's going to be resistance. Who says that you can't do everything? Oh, we have free will, don't you? Free will means you make your own decisions, right? So if you make your own decisions, why can't you just make all the right decisions? And you have to distinguish between all the right decisions and all the best decisions. You can have two decisions, both of which are right, but one's better than the other. So then it would be to make all the ideal decisions. Well, there are two statements in the Rambam which indicate, at least for him, quite clear that having free will doesn't mean you can snap your fingers and be perfect. One is in chapter 5 of the Laws of Tshuva. He says because a person has free will, he has the ability to incline himself to a good path and become righteous. And he has the ability to incline himself to a bad path and become wicked, evil. So there's really a whole process here. There's inclining oneself, but you don't incline yourself and make the right decision. No, you incline yourself to a path. And then you make progress on the path, and that brings you ultimately to being a righteous person. That's not snapping your fingers and getting it all right. And he also says in Hilchos Deos that character traits, many of them can be organized on a spectrum of too little, too much, and some kind of intermediary. So let's take character trait with respect to spending money. There are people who have a terrible monetary disability. They can't spend any money, not even on themselves. These are people who live lives of abject poverty, and when they die, you find in his mattress $250,000 stashed away in cash. Just he can't spend it. And there are other people who can't hold on to a nickel. At the end of the day, the house is empty. Somehow disappears. Give it away, throw it away, gamble it away, or buy things that are irrelevant. Both of those are terrible disabilities. Obviously, where you want to be is where you can make decisions about what's worthwhile spending money on, and buy the things that are necessary and fruitful, and not the ones that aren't. Now, the Rambam says, suppose a person is at one of the extremes. What should he do? Both extremes are bad. So let's say this person can't spend the money. He just can't spend the money. Not on his health, nothing. So of course you think, listen, you have free will. Move to the middle case where you buy the things that are necessary. Rambam doesn't say that. Rambam says, push him to the other extreme, force him to do actions that are characteristic of the other extreme, throwing away everything he has. Use those actions to break the hold of the first extreme. And once you've broken that hold on him, then you can have him gradually move towards the center where he has the ideal attitude towards money. Now, if that's the therapy, that therapy takes time. The Rambam is not saying that you can just make free decisions and push yourself into the center. So it means you go from one bad condition to another bad condition before you can get to the center, which is the good condition. So this means that it's taken for granted that people with free will, there are limitations to what the free will can accomplish. Certainly, immediately. Maybe there are no limitations in the long run because all of our efforts are crowned by the success of divine favor, and God's power is unlimited, so we don't know where we would end up. But, Rabbi Akiva, who married in a period of despair where he was totally ignorant, and his wife, who was the daughter of a very rich person, famous person, gave up everything. He threw her out of the house to marry him because she saw in him good qualities. And then after the age of 40, she convinced him. She pushed him. She was pushing the whole time. And he went into the forest and he had a cathartic experience. He saw water dripping on a rock and saw that the drops of water had worn a hole in the rock. And he said, if water can wear a hole in a rock, the Torah could wear a hole in my head. That was his turning point, and he went to learn in this village and then in larger places, became one of the world's greatest scholars, one of history's greatest scholars. You can imagine a person at the age of 40 is nowhere, and then has to go and sit with little kids and learn Aleph Beis from the very beginning. There's a very special character there, a very special spirit there. And he ended up on top of the world. Now, I'm not promising that people who study diligently will end up on top of the world, but we're not going to set absolute limits to how far you can go. On the other hand, that there are limits to what you can do immediately, that is for sure. So that being the case, again, there's a difference between setting a standard and setting an ideal. And that being the case, it could be that it's not just that this I can't do now, this I can do now, but I've got 6, and any 3 of them I could do now. Any 3 of them. But if I use my energy on this 3, then those 3 will have to wait. And then the question is how to make the decision. Now, it would be natural to think that there is a legal way to make the decision. Rank the 6 in terms of their legal importance, and start with the most important, and if you have spare energy, go to the next important. And work on the ones that in terms of their legal importance. But that is not the only consideration. Let me give you an extreme example. Let's suppose a person says that he has 2 choices. He could keep Shabbos, or he could make blessings before he eats. Wow. Keeping Shabbos is one of the 10 pronouncements at Sinai, and is mentioned a dozen times or more in the Torah, and deliberate violation carries a death penalty. And blessings, one of them is biblical, all the rest, except for maybe one, are rabbinic. In legal terms, it's a no-brainer. Shabbos is infinitely more important than making blessings. Still, Shabbos might not be the right answer. For one thing, Shabbos as a whole might be too difficult for him. Shabbos has social consequences. It has family consequences. You can't keep keeping Shabbos a secret from anybody because it cuts into your activities in dramatic ways. Blessings, you can make them very, very quietly or silently. You can move your lips; people won't notice, and you could do it on your own. It's much less of a challenge. Much less of a challenge means there's much smaller likelihood of failing, and also there's a much smaller likelihood that it will use up all your energy so that nothing else can be accomplished. And may it be good for you in terms of your psychological development, your psychological commitment, to be putting all your energy into one box and not creating new connections with your Torah life, which give you anchors and which give you inspiration to develop. So there's not going to be a simple legal answer to which should be done. I read about a case, a very extreme case, of a 14-year-old girl who decided that she wanted to keep Shabbos, and her family was not religious. And they told her, in this house, you will not keep Shabbos. Not that we won't do it to please you, you will not keep Shabbos. She wrote to one of the, this was, I guess, about 60 years ago, she wrote to one of the people who was answering religious questions at that time, and he wrote back to her, don't keep Shabbos. Now, your parents do not have the authority to tell you not to keep Shabbos. They don't have that authority. So it wasn't a legal decision. It was simply, if you set up a life and death conflict between a 14-year-old girl on the one hand and her parents on the other hand, it's very likely she's going to lose the struggle. And if he loses the struggle, that may be the end of her religious lifetime. I saw it when I was in university, and I was experimenting with traditional Jewish living. It was a small group of students, about 20, 25 of us. And one boy who got involved, his parents found out about it. They took him out of college for a year and sent him to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist succeeded in ruining his mind to the point where when he came back, he wouldn't talk to us, wouldn't participate in what we were doing, wouldn't converse or be friends with us. He just hypnotized him and poisoned him. That can be done. So when you deal with setting priorities, the answer can't be a simple choose the one that's legally more important. You have to think about the person's, your own, if you're making decisions for yourself, your own long-term development. Now, you may not know what the right answer is to that question because you're living your life and you haven't observed, let's say, 30 people go through this transition, so you don't know what the consequences of these decisions could be. And that's why it's very, very important to get advice from people who have seen this done many, many times and who can help set the priorities that are important for you. Here's a technique, and I don't mind telling it to you because if you're on the receiving end of the technique, it's good for you. Sometimes a student will ask, I'm considering taking the following step. Should I or shouldn't I? And the rabbi or the person who's giving advice will say, I don't know. You might not be up to it. I'm not sure. I couldn't tell you confidently to do it. I'm not telling you not to do it. I couldn't tell you confidently to do it. Sometimes the student will say, what do you mean, Rabbi? Of course I can. Of course I can. I can do that. I can handle that. So then the rabbi says, well, if you're sure that you can handle it, okay, I'd agree with you. What's the difference? If he says he can handle it, then he has a reason to make it work because he, on record, that he evaluated that he can handle it. If, on the other hand, he comes to me and I say, I think you should do X, if it doesn't work, it's because I made a mistake. He's off the hook. So he hasn't got that incentive to make it work. What you want to see from his side is the drive and the self-confidence. Yes, I can do it. Even then, sometimes it's right to say no. But you want to see that because then you know that the amount of effort that's necessary will be on board and he'll be able to do it. I'll give you an analogy which some of you probably have experienced and you can use the analogy in this context. And that's athletic training. I exercise regularly. I have a trainer. And I remember 25 years ago when I started doing serious training, and I was, that time, running 3 miles in a half hour, and the trainer, I was 60 then, and the trainer said, I think you could up at 50%. 4.5 miles in 45 minutes in one shot, not gradually. He said, yeah, I think you could do that. So I thought, well, he's a paid trainer, so I guess he knows what he's talking about. And I did it, and it wasn't hard. I couldn't believe it myself. I was dead tired at the end of 30 minutes because that's the end of the session. So mentally, I was pushing myself to get to 30 minutes. By the time I got to 28 minutes, I was like, okay, only 2 minutes left. But when I'm going for 45 minutes, 28 is like, just halfway there. And I found that I had much more strength than I thought I had. On the other hand, there were certain things that I wanted to do, and he said, absolutely not. Don't do that. So I learned that I'm not a good judge of what I'm able to do. And he's a professional. He's the one supposed to know those things. And by following his advice, I think it gave me a tremendous advantage in making the best progress that I could. Now, the same thing is true with respect to projects in terms of Yiddishkeit. Whether the project in and of itself is something which is appropriate, or whether it can be made as a priority at a particular time in life, or whether it's something which could be taken together with others and be made as part of the priorities that you apply to at the moment. For example, I believe that investing time in learning basic Hebrew is very well spent time. And the response I get very often from students is, but if you're talking about 2 hours a day, it's 2 hours a day less instead of not learning Gemara. And the answer is yes, that's true. But over the next 2 years, if you spend 3 months, 2 hours a day learning Hebrew, over the next 1 3/4 years, you'll learn double what you would have learned otherwise. Because the language won't be a problem. I know this from my own experience. I was terrible at languages, still am. And I was put in a program which was all Hebrew speaking, no English at all. We were 10 of us from America. We couldn't even live together. We lodged with Israelis. So it was sink or swim. And in 3 months I was speaking the language. And within 6 months I was in a class with Israelis. Without that I never would have made it. I've studied languages and I just did very poorly at it. So if someone says, but how can I afford not to learn those 2 hours? Well, if you're going to be here, let's say a year or more, then it's a very good investment. If you're only going to be here for 4 months, then I would say no. Then spend the time gathering as much information as you can. And information will be a basis for your practice and your understanding, your communication with others. But if you're going to be here for a year and you can spend 3 months getting the basics of Hebrew vocabulary and Hebrew grammar, it'll make a gigantic difference in the quality of your learning over time. Now, I can say that because I've been there and done that. And there are many other aspects of this type of learning where, in terms of setting priorities. Again, with respect to Shabbos and other things, usually people are conscious of this, but they don't know how to weigh it. What's going to happen with your relationship with your family and with your friends when you take on this particular mitzvah? Even a head covering. Even a head covering. And you don't have to wear a yarmulke. You can wear a beret or a cap of some kind. But he never takes it off. Did you notice that? He's always got something on his head. I mean, has he got a cold, or was he getting prematurely gray? I mean, what's the matter with him? Why has he always got something on his head? And if you aren't prepared to answer that or to live with that, then it may not be a good move, because that puts a strain on you, and that strain will cost you in other areas in which you are trying to make progress, and all of that has to be taken into account. Now, one element here, which again I've observed in people with tragic outcomes, and that is you have to take account of what you take on for yourself as a challenge will affect other people around you. So if you're in a yeshiva and you're not married, you don't have family, you don't have children, so there's less of an impact of that kind. Still, you have friends in the yeshiva. You have study partners in the yeshiva. Let's suppose you decide that you want to learn before prayer, before davening, which is a wonderful thing to do. And you decide to get up at 6 o'clock and learn from 6:30 to 7:30 and then daven. Are you going to sit there from 6:30 to 7:30 alone? Or are you going to find a study partner who can be there with you? How many other people are in the Beis Medrash at 6:30? 75? Or 3? If there are 3, then you're going to be one of 4. How do you feel about that? How do you feel about yourself? How do you feel about the other ones who aren't there? Does a little bit of pride come creeping in? A little bit of looking down? I'm there at 6:30. You guys straggle in at 7:20, 7:25, still finishing your coffee. But I'm there at 6:30. That has to be taken into account. That's a terrible kilkul, a terrible corruption of one's character. The Baal Shem Tov and his chief disciple, the Maggid of Bezrich, both were overheard on their deathbeds, saying, it's a verse, don't bring me to the pitfall of pride. They lived extraordinarily outstanding lives. The Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, doesn't get tired and doesn't run out of strategies. And the last shot was, okay, you really did a good job. You really had a great life. You really turned in a terrific performance. You're really great. I'm really great. And then for people like that, the whole thing goes down the drain. I'm really great. What you should be is full of gratitude that HaKadosh Baruch Hu put you in the position and gave you the ability to do all of that, instead of saying that I'm great. Indeed, the Torah itself tells us that Moses was the humblest of all men. So I have heard people ask the following pertinent question. Let's imagine Moses getting up in the morning and looking at himself in the mirror. Of course, he didn't do that, but let's imagine, here I am, Moses. I was the one God chose to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. I was the one whom God chose to receive the Torah and transmit it to the Jewish people. I was on a level of prophecy that no one before me or after me was or will be. And I'm very humble, I am. How does he manage that? Does he have to lie to himself to be humble? To pretend he's nothing, just Joe average? When he comes down from the mountain and sees the people with the golden calf, he says to the Levites, those who worship it as an idol, kill them. Moses wasn't a shrinking violet. He didn't sit in the corner and say, oh, everybody knows better than I do, and how can I take responsibility? No. He was a man of drastic action. So his humility was consistent with knowing his strengths. So what then is humility? So Chaim Luzzatto and the Mesilas Yesharim, the path of the just so-called, defines humility as follows. Humility means that I'm not worthy of praise for my great qualities. And pride means I am worthy of praise for my great qualities. If you don't think you have great qualities, you're not a candidate for humility or pride. And of course, you're also dead wrong, because as the poster has it with the little kid who says, I know I'm somebody because God don't make junk. So how does Moses maintain this perspective that I'm not worthy of praise for my great qualities? The answer is, it's impossible to tell the extent to which the great qualities you have are due to a divine gift that you've been given, and to what extent it's due to your effort. And in particular, you can't know this about anybody else. There's a Gemara in Tanis which tells the following story, that one of the great scholars was in the market, and he saw a man, and he made the remark, look how ugly he is. As the commentators pointed out, it wasn't just physical ugliness, it was ugliness of character. So the man overheard him and said to him, you say I'm ugly? Go to the craftsman that made me. Now the commentators point out that this man was Elijah the prophet. And he was sent there to give this scholar a message. You're looking at me and you're saying that I'm ugly? Let me ask you a question, Rabbi. When you get out of bed in the morning, what's your aspiration for the day? Your parents were scholars. Your siblings are all great scholars. Your environment is filled with the great, righteous, holy people of the generation. Your goal for the day is to be perfect. Okay, I wasn't born in such a family. I wasn't raised in such an environment. I live in such a neighborhood. My goal for the day is to be decent. That's my goal. Sometimes I make it and sometimes I don't. You're struggling to be perfect. I'm struggling to be decent. Who says God loves your struggle more than mine? Because, as we said 22 minutes ago, when you struggle and when you give everything that you have, there could be no complaints over what you don't accomplish. Rachmana liba boy, because Baruch Hu desires the heart. If you give the heart, then you've done all that you can. If you've done all that you can, there's no complaint for the things that you don't manage to do. So Moses says, sure, my accomplishment is as great, is an outstandingly great accomplishment. But who says that my accomplishment is a reflection of more effort than other people put in? The fact that their accomplishment is less doesn't tell me anything about their effort. And that's why the Rambam says that everybody could be as righteous as Moses. We've mentioned this. Because, as Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says, everyone could serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with all of his efforts, and they'll be as righteous as Moses. So, the choice of the priority is not going to be dependent upon the outcome as much as the choice of the priority is where the effort will have the greatest effect on the person. There is a famous image that you find in the Mussar literature, and I think there's a question that could be asked, needs to be understood in a certain specific way. The rule that they say is, if you're not going up, you're going down. No such thing as just being in one position. If you're not going up, you're going down. And the example they give is, if you take a fish and throw it into a stream, a moving stream, see what happens. If it moves upstream, then it's going up. It's alive. If it's going downstream, it could be very well dead, and the water is carrying it downstream. That's the difference between being spiritually alive and spiritually dead. If you're not going up, you're going down. Fine. That's what's written in the books. I want to ask the following question. I throw the fish into the stream and it doesn't go up or down. It stays in the same place. It's alive or dead. It's got to be alive, because if we're dead, it would flow down with the stream, with the tide of the stream going downstream. So if it's staying in the same place, that means it's swimming just not to be pulled downstream. So if you ask, is it possible to be in one place in terms of your performance? The answer is yes. It may take all your efforts just not to be pulled down. But if you talk about what's going on inside, if you're making the effort, you're making yourself stronger. And since you're making yourself stronger, you're going up. Even if your external performance isn't changing. So I think the Mussar Sfarim have to be understood in terms of reading what's going on inside, not what's going on outside. There's a parable. A king took a man and said, I'm assigning you to the following service. Come into this room. He comes into the room and sees there's a wall with a hole in it, and there's an iron bar coming from the outside into the room with a hole. And there's a certain amount of room that the iron bar could be moved. And the king says, your job is to rotate that iron bar. You'll find there's resistance. Rotate the iron bar. Okay, that's the king. And he does it every day, Year goes by, king checks on him from time to time. After a year, king comes to check on him and he says, I've been doing this for a year. Could I go outside and look on the other side of the wall and see what's there? What is it I'm doing? He says, sure, come with me. Comes out and he finds that there's a weight and there's on a rope, and the rope is on the bar, and he's rotating the bar, and the weight is going up and down, 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 for a whole year. So the guy is terribly disappointed. What did you assign me to do this for? Not accomplishing anything at all. King said, now look in the mirror. Look at your muscles. You're not the same person you were a year ago. The thing being worked on wasn't the weight outside. It was you. You're being worked on. You're not the same person. Oh, that's a different perspective. So in setting priorities, that inner perspective has to be taken into account. We tend to measure things in terms of external performance because it's objective. How many hours did I learn today? How many times was I distracted? when I daven, did I pay attention to the words or didn't I pay attention to the words? And that's an important perspective. Nothing wrong with making sure that your performance is as good as you can make it. But you have to pay attention also to the effect that it has on your inner life. And that includes where you make effort after effort after effort, and at least in the meantime, you don't succeed. Even memory, where the Gemara says that memory is really the help of heaven. I don't have a very good memory, and I worked on it at various times in my life. The times I used to take notes on the Gemara that I was learning. I had notebooks. Once I was looking through my old notebooks, and I picked it up and said, wow, I don't even remember taking notes on that Masechta. I don't remember that I did it. That doesn't look like a good success. Not only do I remember what's in it, I don't remember even making the notes. But by making the notes and making the effort, I certainly showed how much I cared about it. I showed how much it meant to me. And maybe because of that, Kadosh Baruch Hu gave me more strength to remember than I otherwise would have had. So was it worthless? No, it wasn't worthless. It's just that the worth that it has is interacting with divine providence rather than my taking control and making it happen. Well, from my point of view, divine providence is behind all the outcomes. So that also has to be taken into account in the setting of priorities. I want to make one more point about this. You'll hear people say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives you the strength to overcome every challenge. That's something which could be said. Give you the strength to overcome every challenge. But if so, doesn't that undermine everything we said this whole hour? So then I should be able to always do what's right. Because that's the challenge. The challenge to do what's right. The answer is no, it's a mistake. Indeed, you take the rule, everyone has the strength to overcome every challenge, and you use that to decide what are challenges and what aren't challenges. Let's suppose you're facing an obstacle. Is that obstacle a challenge or not? Well, if you're able to overcome it, then it could be an obstacle. But there could be it could be a challenge. But there could be obstacles which you can't overcome, and then there isn't a challenge for you. And I'll give you an example. I hope you'll remember this when you have children, because this happens, I would say, to every parent from time to time. Your child has a problem, and you know the answer. You've been there, done that. But you also know that your child can't accept the answer from you. He's 14, he's going through adolescent rebellion, he's developing his own sense of identity, whatever it is, he can't take it from you. That for a parent, that's excruciating. My child is suffering, and I could stop his suffering if he would only listen to me. And he won't listen to me. So what am I supposed to say? Well, if the challenge is to help my child, then God gave me the ability to help my child. So I'm going to bang my head against it until it works. That may not be the right answer. The right answer may be, I'm not the right means to help the child. I have to give up on that. I have to live with my inability to help him. That's my challenge, to live with the fact that I can't help him. And then, as some intelligent parents do, try to use the friendship or respect that the child has for somebody else to overcome that obstacle. So if he has an uncle with whom he's very friendly, I could say, if the uncle's my brother, I could say to him, listen, my child's suffering this problem, I know the solution, here's the solution, you tell it to him. Because where we are now, he can't take it from me. You tell him to him as if it's yours. Don't tell him that I told you. And that'll help him. That's because you accept the fact that you can't do it. But if you are stuck in the rut of, if this is a challenge for me and I have the ability to overcome it, I have to bang my head against it until I succeed, you'll never accept the fact that that's not the right way to do it. So the fact that you have the ability to overcome every challenge doesn't mean that every obstacle in your way is a challenge. And deciding whether the obstacle is a challenge or isn't means deciding independently whether you can overcome it, and that also needs advice, because sometimes it's hard for you to know whether it's possible to overcome or isn't possible to overcome. And other people who have seen people like you go through the process can help you make that decision. So the bottom line, setting priorities is a complex business. It's in a certain sense a subtle business, and like everything else in life, you won't always get it right. There's no guarantee you'll get it right. So that's another thing that Kodesh Baruch Hu you have to live with, is your fallibility. You're not a prophet, you didn't get it directly from God. What the right thing to do is, you pray to God and say, listen, I have to make this decision. Please send me those who can give me the right advice, or inspire me with the right advice, and whatever happens, I accept that your divine providence is what organizes for me the challenges that I meet, and I'm prepared to try to meet them as best I can.